Bloodstains scream a terrifying truth. Whoever snatched Nancy Guthrie absolutely botched their original playbook mid-crime. The forensic trail leaves zero doubt that a sudden pivot occurred. The perpetrator clearly mapped out every detail, yet an unexpected disruption indoors derailed everything. They scrambled to execute a backup strategy in absolute desperation. We already know the strategy shifted as the crimson splatters confirm that much. The real mystery revolves around what triggered that pivot, and the answer is finally unfolding. A defining and haunting piece of visual evidence from this entire probe remains the snapshot capturing crimson spatters across Nancy Guthrie's entryway. Pima County detectives officially verified those specific droplets belonged to the victim, instantly turning them into the core focal point of the criminal inquiry. The true chilling detail, often overlooked by mainstream media, isn't simply the presence of these fluid traces. The shock stems from their absence. You won't find a single drop near her sleeping quarters, cooking space, or lounging zones. An insider feeding information to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton revealed that the victim's residence looked completely untouched, showing absolutely zero struggle marks. Investigators reportedly labeled the vast majority of the living spaces as perfectly pristine. Authorities familiar with the probe confirmed an eerie lack of violence within the interior walls. The trusted informant literally portrayed specific sections of the household as flawlessly spotless. Ashley Banfield reinforced this theory during her broadcast on Day 56 of the Active Hunt, featuring insights from Phil Waters. The former Houston murder investigator, boasting a resume of over 400 solved mysteries, completely agreed with this pristine assessment. Detectives discovered zero biological markers near the sleeping or lounging quarters whatsoever. A violent path simply does not exist indoors because the gruesome scene originates solely at the main entryway. Reporter Ashley Banfield also shared gripping updates via her Drop Dead Serious audio show, citing a pair of distinct police contacts. The crimson stains weren't confined to the exterior paving, they bled indoors as well. A continuous fluid track mirrored the outdoor spatter, trailing directly over the doorway seal and spilling onto the steps. You basically have interior stain formations mirroring the exact same gruesome splatter found right outside the main threshold. Recent revelations pinpointed the precise location directly spanning the main doorframe, while regional authorities remained tight-lipped about verifying these leaks. The podcast host stood remarkably firm regarding the layout specifics. A pair of trusted police contacts validated the narrative together, though one informant provided significantly deeper layers of context. When that subsequent contact explained why initial deputies immediately summoned the murder squad, the catalyst wasn't the patio stains. The true red flag was the horrifying display right at the primary threshold. Picture a perfectly tidy residence harboring just a single violently disrupted zone. The terrifying trail starts at an isolated spot, lingering adequately to mark both edges of the entry molding. The fluid then stretches externally over the steps, completely lacking any chaotic brawling through the hallways. Everything is isolated to the primary doorway. The attacker never intended for the operation to conclude there. Figuring out what forced this climax and deciphering the preceding seconds remains the central focus of our deep dive today. Analyzing the chilling groundwork laid at the residence reveals the exact original blueprint before chaos inevitably struck. During her initial public conversation regarding the missing matriarch, Savannah Guthrie spoke with Hoda Cobb on March 26. In that 2026 broadcast, the presenter emphasized that the rear exits were discovered wedged ajar. She intentionally reiterated this crucial detail multiple times throughout their chat. Amidst the initial chaotic haze, relatives logically assumed medical personnel had breached the rear entryway utilizing a gurney. No other rationale seemed logical at the time, yet the victim's mobile device remained indoors alongside her handbag and favorite footwear. The assailant snatched her wearing merely nightclothes and barefoot. Emergency vehicles never actually arrived. Those rear exits stood ajar simply because an intruder purposefully arranged them that way. The early medical emergency theory quickly dissolved. Trusted police intel shared by reporters transformed a daughter's bizarre discovery into evidence of a highly calculated tactical breach. During the March 31st podcast release, journalists revealed that several agency insiders claimed the kidnapper weaponized the homeowner's personal patio planters to wedge the exits wide open. That rear culinary entryway features both a mesh barrier and a solid wooden frame. Intruders jammed both wide open simultaneously using the identical garden containers to block the yard fencing. A pair of secondary police contacts have recently stepped forward to verify those rear portals were entirely unlatched. The culprit repurposed decorative ceramic planters just to jam the mesh barrier. That makes 3 distinct entryways physically secured in an open state all at once. A top-tier informant also leaked that the suspect systematically destroyed several outdoor surveillance lenses and illumination fixtures prior to executing the snatching. Regional authorities commanding the Pima jurisdiction currently refuse to formally validate these tactical maneuvers. Take that with a grain of salt. However, analyzing shattered lenses, darkened bulbs, and a trio of synchronized unlatched gateways paints a very terrifying portrait. These actions absolutely destroy the theory of a random spontaneous strike. Criminals cannot neutralize surveillance equipment unless they scouted the blind spots beforehand. An intruder doesn't randomly utilize yard decor to prop open barriers without previously pacing the grounds and formulating a concrete strategy. Nobody pulls off this level of coordination during a blind maiden visit. Even the Federal Bureau's current probing tactics strongly support this premeditated stalking theory. Detectives subpoenaed adjacent surveillance recordings specifically targeting January 11th and January 24th. These dates occurred weeks prior to the February 1st tragedy, though agencies refused to disclose their exact target. Subpoenaing digital records for 2 seemingly random afternoons strongly implies detectives suspect crucial preparatory events unfolded around the residence during those windows. That specific digital requisition screams that federal agents believe the predator stalked the victim's neighborhood a minimum of 2 times prior to the vanishing. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County explicitly stated on tape that his squad views this snatching as a highly focused personal hit. The commander also admitted his task force likely understands the underlying driving force. Yet he absolutely refuses to broadcast that rationale due to the active nature of the manhunt. A stalked prey disabled lenses synchronized entryways, and a designated rear escape route constructed the ultimate blueprint. Despite all this meticulous framing, the violence somehow erupted at the primary entrance. We must now delve into the darkest corner of this mystery that armchair detectives continually fail to explore. If we completely acknowledge this strike was ruthlessly calculated, we face a far more terrifying dilemma than simply questioning why the exit path shifted. One tiny misstep could shatter this entire operation, forcing us to seriously question the true nature of this plot and the critical anchor holding it together. Staying completely invisible remains the absolute ironclad rule for pulling off a calculated ransom extraction, exactly as detectives suspect happened here. The captor absolutely must remain a total stranger to their target without leaving a single trace behind. Handing over physical descriptions instantly shatters the leverage required for demanding cash negotiating terms or presenting survival proof, since absolute secrecy fuels this entire criminal machine. Once that cover blows, the whole tactical foundation crumbles instantly into dust. Survival mode immediately replaces the primary objective when things go south, and our perpetrator clearly recognized the supreme values. AC give staying hidden. Security tape dropped by federal agents on February 10th captures this intruder actively executing a highly calculated maneuver outside her pitch-black residence. Swathed in thick gloves and a heavy mask, he lunges toward the doorbell lens while cleverly utilizing the patio bushes as a makeshift visual shield. Sporting dark trousers and a coat, he hauled a 25-liter hiking pack while openly flaunting a lethal firearm strapped to his side. Hiding from the recording device, wearing hand coverings, and utilizing facial disguise, all scream one undeniable motive, dodging any chance of future recognition. Yet authorities have continually failed to address a massive glaring mystery regarding that footage, as the facial covering was clearly donned for the outdoor security lens. Did he keep his disguise secured while ambushing Nancy Guthrie in her unlit bedroom during those terrifying indoor moments? We honestly have absolutely zero clue regarding her final vision. Pinning down that specific detail changes everything. Considering this meticulous stalker prioritized secrecy heavily enough to sabotage the outdoor recording devices beforehand. Shielding his features from a lens he fully intended to smash proves this mastermind fiercely dedicated enormous mental energy toward completely evading detection. Slipping through a rear fence into the shadows far from prying street lenses perfectly aligns with tactics obsessively demanding total stealth. Fleeing through the yard served far beyond mere convenience. He selected that route purely for camouflage, aiming to march his captive past hidden sightlines before vanishing into the night. Ultimately, he breached her personal space. Speaking candidly during morning television, Savannah Guthrie painted a vivid picture of her mother suffering severe agony, unlocking clues vastly deeper than simple walking difficulties. Severe spinal problems meant retrieving posts from the curb was a rare victory, leaving her largely immobile on average afternoons. Those devastating limitations totally shattered the rear escape theory, forcing an ailing victim barefoot through the culinary space, out the terrace, and over rough outdoor soil in pitch blackness demanded unimaginable physical exertion. True crime host Ashley Banfield tackled this massive discrepancy head-on during her audio broadcast with a brutally blunt inquiry. Was the original intent to march a hostage outside via the rear exit using lethal threats, only to abruptly discover her shattered physical limitations? The broadcaster speculated that the assailant horribly miscalculated his elderly captive's stamina, utterly failing to anticipate her severe inability to traverse the planned distance. Those unexpected physical barriers instantly forced a massive tactical pivot, forming the highly credible and deeply documented physical limitation hypothesis. Expecting a suffering elder who barely managed basic yard tasks to silently endure a treacherous midnight trek under immense terrifying pressure borders on sheer lunacy. While physical struggles easily justify abandoning the original path, that narrative completely fails to address the baffling evidence left behind at the front entryway. Dr. Peter Valentine, an elite academic commanding the Investigative Sciences Department over at the University of New Haven, weighed in. Boasting forensic trace credentials across 7 distinct jurisdictions and national tribunals, he broke down the Foyer carnage during his audio appearance roughly 52 days into the manhunt. He expertly categorized the drops as skeletal traces, a highly technical classification denoting vital fluids partially hardening on a surface before external forces warp them. A congealed perimeter surrounding an empty core absolutely rules out swift movement through an entryway, screaming instead that the victim lingered significantly. Analyzing the grim scene directly without hesitation, he noted heavily crusted biological markers scattered across the exterior stoop, strongly indicating advanced stages of undisturbed coagulation. Those macabre puddles sat untouched long enough to dehydrate, while the injured party remained stationary, a horrifying detail the professor located stretching across both interior and exterior boundaries. Spotting pooled biological material congealing simultaneously on both sides of the exterior doorframe completely shatters any theory regarding a rushed, panicked exit. Detectives must logically deduce that this terrifying standstill stretched out, proving this brutal encounter was incredibly prolonged rather than a fleeting struggle. The wounded target remained trapped in that doorway for an agonizingly long duration, leaving a fluid trail freely on opposing sides of the wooden barrier. Simple physical exhaustion never creates stationary gore, like that totally debunking the idea that a frustrated kidnapper just casually opted to holler out the main entrance. Any swift relocation attempt would leave smeared streaks of continuous motion painting a rapid exit trail rather than a stagnant puddle of trauma. You simply do not find undisturbed organic pools resting symmetrically across a doorway unless the individuals involved stalled out for a shockingly substantial time frame. An intense, prolonged event unfolded at that specific entryway, which permanently halted their momentum. Whatever occurred trapped the injured matriarch hovering directly over the entryway divide for an eternity before her captor finally dragged her onto the veranda. What horrific standoff could possibly pin a bleeding hostage against a doorway instead of shoving them straight into the darkness outside? Why did they suddenly halt the abduction process long enough to generate crusted forensic clues spanning across the entire entryway? A brutal physical struggle or sudden intense standoff completely derailed the fluid extraction process they initially mapped out. That severe disruption caused a massive temporal delay, affording the crimson pools ample opportunity to crystallize into the exact formations the good doctor identified. When managing an abduction completely reliant on absolute secrecy, having your victims suddenly identify you triggers the ultimate catastrophic failure. We need to deeply analyze the absolute terror of being unmasked here, because this intruder definitely did not just wander onto some random neighborhood property. Detectives confirmed a chilling reality immediately: this abduction was a calculated strike. Nancy Guthrie was the ultimate prize. Every inch of her estate was watched, security lenses were blindly bypassed, and the getaway path was flawlessly mapped out. Household items were repurposed into tactical gear, proving this level of precision requires deep, intimate knowledge of the ground. We'll show you grounds. It's not just a casual glance. Could she have identified the intruder lurking in her sanctuary? That agonizing unknown remains the biggest mystery currently unsolved by the available facts. Yet the grim consequences of her recognizing the perpetrator leave a clear trail that forensics can easily decipher. Successful extortions rely heavily on total anonymity between captive and captor. This is absolutely not about ensuring the hostage remains docile. In reality, it hinges completely on shielding the perpetrator's identity, since every subsequent phase crumbles if the captive can name their tormentor. Extortion demands, money exchanges, and tense bargaining completely rely on the abductor staying securely hidden behind an impenetrable veil of secrecy. The exact second a hostage suddenly recognizes the features or identity of their malicious captor, the strategic game violently flips on its head. Releasing the hostage safely is suddenly deemed too massive of a gamble to take. Imagine the sudden panic within the mastermind's twisted scheme the very second that disastrous realization occurs. The attacker meticulously stalked the grounds repeatedly, severed the security feeds, and masterminded the perfect evasion routes. The entire criminal plot rested heavily on the absolute certainty that once the money was secured and the dust finally settled, the hostage could never expose your identity. That anonymity was paramount. Stripped of that secrecy, the game abruptly shifts. An abduction where the captive knows their attacker transforms instantly from a simple cash grab into a uniquely lethal threat for the desperate perpetrator. A sudden recognition creates chaos that pre-planned getaway paths and shattered security lenses simply cannot fix. Suddenly, the captive transforms into a massive liability who holds the power to utterly destroy the attacker. Sadly, erasing that dangerous link leaves only one gruesome option. Her catching a glimpse of his true identity forced a drastic pivot. It was absolutely not a minor tweak, but a catastrophic implosion of his original design, altering his next moves entirely. Biological evidence gathered at the entryway fully supports either grim scenario heavily hinting that both terrifying motives collided simultaneously. Specialist Amy Santoro, a seasoned forensics expert holding 18 years of diverse experience, dissecting gruesome crime scenes and analyzing complex laboratory patterns, jumped on the March 17, 2026 broadcast of Megyn Kelly's SiriusXM program to critically evaluate the fluid trails visible in public media surrounding the Guthrie residence. The analyst openly clarified her total lack of official ties to the ongoing probe, relying strictly on widely published media clips. Her compelling breakdown remains strictly independent professional commentary, lacking any formal endorsement from the actual task force. She confidently categorized the patio spatters as gravity drops fluid plunging directly downward from a freely bleeding wound onto the concrete. The visual cues suggested the droplets plunged from at least 2 feet high, though pinpointing the exact bodily origin like a limb or facial injury remained impossible with those images. However, the volume painted a vivid picture. The sheer quantity of fluid scattered around strongly argued against a casual stroll with a minor, easily managed superficial cut. Her professional take suggested the victim suffered a massive rapid hemorrhage. This torrential flow resulted in heavy pooling alongside those distinct secondary splashes experts recognized instantly. Those tiny peripheral drops uniquely form whenever thick fluid strikes a hard base from decent elevations. Gravity pulled those droplets downward from an origin easily exceeding 2 feet in the air. Grasping that heavy fluid loss is absolutely crucial for deciphering the entryway puzzle. Trivial scrapes simply cannot generate the extensive scatter the analyst noticed in those exterior photos. Only a severe, rapidly pumping laceration leaves that kind of grim signature. Furthermore, lugging a profusely bleeding victim through the air perfectly accounts for the straight, downward trajectories that multiple independent analysts universally agree upon. The massive quantity guarantees Nancy sustained brutal trauma long before reaching the patio steps. The layout explicitly confirms she was utterly off her feet during transport. The expert definitively eliminated certain violent scenarios as well, completely ruling out any possibility of a ballistic injury based on the spread. The microscopic misting and tight explosive clusters typically left behind by a speeding bullet were completely missing from the gruesome layout. In her highly trained view, the visual trails entirely lacked the chaotic hallmarks inevitably tied to devastating ballistic impacts. Instead, she floated several agonizing alternatives: violently ripped tissue, a brutal smash to the skull, or perhaps a forcefully ruptured nasal cavity. The analyst noted that aging tissue tears, easily suggesting even minor, blunt force, might trigger the heavy flow captured perfectly in the chilling photographs. Additionally, the scientists highlighted a crucial detail that amateur internet sleuths and mainstream reporters largely misinterpreted. Since she relied entirely on broadcasted exterior angles completely starved of any internal forensic photography, she admitted spotting 0 stains immediately around the main entrance. While public visuals hinted the initial blow happened outdoors, she swiftly added a major disclaimer to that observation. The unreleased interior landscape remains a total enigma. That precise knowledge gap is where leaked insider descriptions and advanced doorway evaluations effortlessly step in to paint the full picture. The analyst never denied indoor carnage existed. She merely acknowledged the restrictive boundaries of the televised clips provided to her. Confidential tipsters and seasoned medical examiners essentially fill in the horrifying blanks hidden away from neighborhood surveillance lenses. Dried, flaking spatters clinging to both edges of the entryway frame strongly suggest the bleeding victim lingered right at that deadly boundary. Dr. Michael Ben, a renowned medical examiner reviewing evidence exclusively for Fox News Digital, peeled back another gruesome layer detailing the actual trauma. He concluded Nancy was hemorrhaging heavily from either her extremities or facial region, brilliantly decoding the intricate patterns left completely behind. Blood tells a chilling story when properly read. Those specific pale-centered circular splatters definitively signal severe airway trauma, proving the fluid mixed heavily with oxygen as it escaped, prompting him to warn, "These are certainly not innocent stains." Analyzing the splatter shapes, quantities, and their exact distribution across the exterior patio creates a terrifyingly clear picture perfectly matching the violent choreography of a forced kidnapping. Without stepping onto the physical property, the investigator relied solely on crime scene photography to confidently deduce that those ring-like stains originated from devastating facial injuries. While that remains the most logical scientific explanation for the splatter, it hardly proves her exact fate, even though both leading experts ultimately share one crucial hypothesis. The gruesome fluid undoubtedly points towards severe strikes above the victim's shoulders, entirely ruling out any massive arterial trauma or fatal bullet wounds. A rapid hemorrhage pouring near the head strongly indicates intimate, close-quarters violence, perfectly mirroring a heavy punch, a nasty tumble, or a brutal face-to-face struggle in the dark. Former federal investigator Maureen O'Connell went on national television this past March 8th, meticulously breaking down the gruesome trail by examining exactly what evidence was missing. The crimson splatter was perfectly continuous, lacking any of those expected empty spaces that naturally occur whenever an object physically blocks the falling liquid droplets. A victim staggering away naturally creates a broken, alternating pattern across the pavement. Those telltale pauses simply did not exist anywhere on that wooden patio, leading the specialist to firmly declare, "I highly doubt she walked away on her own 2 feet." Footsteps always leave blank spots, where shoes catch the falling liquid, yet this particular crime scene remained chillingly uninterrupted from the door to the stairs. Her professional assessment remains grimly clear. They definitely bundled her up tightly and physically hauled her away. The pristine circular shape of the drops proves they plummeted straight down from an elevated position, completely lacking the stretched out tails that indicate forward momentum, or desperate running, solidifying the terrifying theory of a highly controlled two-man physical carry. Microscopic crimson mist hidden within the larger stains practically screamed of violent, desperate coughing fits. This crucial speckling offered a terrifying silver lining. The stolen woman was actively breathing during the abduction, even if knocked completely senseless. The analyst frankly told the reporter there is absolutely no way she marched out of there. A pair of assailants definitely hauled her off. Another veteran federal profiler backed up this grim assessment, confirming the liquid fell vertically without any velocity. However, he doubted the cocoon theory, noting that if the attackers had shrouded the victim, they did a spectacularly sloppy job since the crimson fluid easily leaked right through their coverings. Yet that minor debate changes absolutely nothing about the horrifying reality. She was airborne, lifted away by captors completely unable to touch the ground and break the dripping liquid sequence. Fluid leaked from her elevated moving body, a horrifying reality that merges perfectly with the doorway evidence analyzed meticulously by other leading forensic experts. Forensic data proves she remained pinned at the entrance for an extended duration, allowing the gruesome stains on either side of the jam to completely dry around their edges. The prior specialist confirmed that the exact moment they crossed the outer threshold, the victim was entirely airborne. This specific timeline paints a terrifyingly vivid scene of a brutal, lingering struggle right at the entryway. The invaders restrained the elderly woman by the jam, while she bled profusely, waiting until the droplets began to crust before mercilessly hauling her over the wooden exterior patio. That front entrance served as ground zero for the main violent encounter, not merely a simple passageway. Piecing together the hardened facts leads directly to one undeniably chilling sequence of events. Police have kept their official narrative tightly under wraps, so this timeline remains wholly independent. By fusing forensic splatter, professional profiling, and investigative journalism, a dark truth emerges: the assailants systematically prepped the battlefield. Intruders slashed the security bulbs, propped the rear gate wide, and crept onto the stoop wearing full tactical gear, a 25-liter rucksack, and a holstered pistol fully prepared for violence. Federal authorities dropped a terrifying clip on February 10, 2026, showing the shadowy figure utilizing landscaping to blind the smart doorbell before permanently killing its electrical power source entirely. Methodical and coldly familiar with the layout, the attacker left zero physical clues across the sleeping quarters or inner sanctums, proving this was hardly his first time walking those halls. Informants tied to the case swore the dining room and lounges remained absolutely spotless, without a single item displaced. The victim never stood a chance to fight back or flee through the familiar comforts of her own home. Finding zero crimson stains inside the house speaks volumes, acting as a massive piece of the overall forensic puzzle. A highly coordinated predator breached the residence, located the target instantly, and completely bypassed the sprawling inner hallways with lethal precision. With pristine corridors and undisturbed furniture, the violence clearly ignited and extinguished itself in one isolated horrific spot without ever dragging on. There was no frantic chase from the kitchen to the bedroom. The terrible nightmare remained heavily contained. Spotless inner sanctums, paired with a drenched doorway, point toward an incredibly fast, highly targeted takedown right at the threshold. The entire tragedy kicks off at the main entrance, leaving experts wondering if a sudden noise lured her out of bed in the dead of the night. Forensics cannot definitively prove if she wandered out to investigate a bump in the night, or if an invader violently dragged her straight to the foyer. The science does confirm she remained trapped within the doorframe, long enough for her leaking wounds to solidify into the exact crusty rings the analyst expertly mapped out. She stood frozen in terror before being hoisted away, dripping heavily from violent facial trauma, while suspended high above the wooden deck planks, never taking a single step under her own power as the gruesome liquid rained down onto the pavement. Every single veteran profiler reviewing the incident files universally agrees. Multiple assailants lifted the bleeding victim, entirely removing her ability to physically escape on her own 2 feet. A retired federal operative revealed to the press, subduing a frightened 84-year-old victim requires significantly more physical leverage coordination and sheer bodily strength than a lone wolf could ever realistically manage. Experts affirmed on television that hauling dead weight through pitch-black rugged woods is physically impossible for a solo attacker, confirming a minimum of 2 highly tactical operators flawlessly executed this brutal snatch-and-grab operation. 2 intruders definitely hauled her out of that house. They left a wide-open trail behind them, the rear gate, the patio screen, and the main kitchen entrance. Despite perfectly prepping 3 different rear escape routes, the perpetrators completely ignored them during their getaway. Ex-federal investigator Andrew Bringwell explained to Newsweek that the primary goal was abducting Mrs. Guthrie, though the plot clearly derailed. A violent struggle erupted, leaving her wounded rather than dead. The entire scheme simply collapsed. Whoever orchestrated this lost control and those bloodstains by the main entryway physically prove where the chaos started. Which brings us to the core mystery we've been teasing. Why did such a meticulously crafted operation fall apart? Think about the scouting trips throughout early and mid-January, the systematically destroyed security lenses, the cut power lines, and the rear entry perfectly propped open using yard decorations. Add a perpetrator fully geared to hide their identity, and you get a calculated scheme relying heavily on one crucial factor, staying unbroken. In a pre-planned ransom grab, the captive absolutely cannot figure out who snatched them. Anonymity isn't just a bonus feature here. It is the fundamental bedrock of the entire crime. Every single post-abduction phase requires total secrecy, including survival proof and extortion messages. Even releasing the hostage only works if the perpetrator remains a total mystery. The criminal banked on her never recognizing him, which explains the outdoor disguise and systematically destroyed security lenses. Once inside that pitch-black residence during the initial clash, nobody knows what actually caught Nancy's eye. It remains completely unclear if the intruder's face covering was still secured or removed. Perhaps she recognized a familiar vocal tone, a distinct physique, or simply how they navigated her living space. Detectives are absolutely convinced this was a highly calculated grab, meaning the culprit purposely singled out Nancy Guthrie from the start. Selecting a precise victim implies some hidden connection, whether distant or close, making mutual identification a huge risk. The moment she spotted something familiar, the entire operation didn't just get messy. It suffered a catastrophic failure right at the core. Escaping through that flawlessly prepared rear pathway instantly lost all importance. The single frantic goal shifted to dragging her outside, instantly desperate to stop her from making another move or uttering a single word. That main entryway offered the quickest escape route. They forced her through there, lingering at the doorway for a noticeably prolonged time frame that Dr. Valentine specifically highlighted. A brutal struggle erupted there, splattering blood across both edges of the doorframe right before they hauled her away into the night. Former federal investigator Raymond Carr insists the rear served solely for breaking in, yet he completely agrees regarding the violent front escape. He firmly believes they dragged her out the front. While specialists might debate the rear gate's purpose, that grim doorway evidence unites all their theories. They rushed her out of that entrance actively bleeding. That marks the absolute limit of available facts, birthing a massive mystery. Asking if the intruder pivoted because she spotted him remains an unproven theory, not absolute fact. Her midnight ordeal, spanning January 31st to February 1st, 2026, remains shrouded. We simply do not know what she identified or screamed. Her actions during the ambush and the shocking curveball that totally derailed the home invader are details our current facts simply cannot explain. Detectives hold those secrets close without leaking a word yet. The scene paints a clear picture. This was a calculated abduction completely anchored on the assailant remaining unknown. The strategy demanded obsessive stealth outside the property, from destroyed bulbs to disguised approaches and a hidden rear escape route. The intruder deliberately covered up for the porch lens before aggressively ripping it offline. Inside, the residence remained completely untouched aside from the main doorway. Right there, fresh blood pooled and partially coagulated against both walls before they finally dragged her away. They opted for that main entrance instead of the meticulously prepped rear pathway, completely abandoning the fence they purposely jammed open using her garden planters. Fleeing through the front wasn't the original blueprint. They simply used the nearest exit when their meticulous operation blew up in their faces. Every single clue points toward a disastrous face-to-face confrontation, an exact second where the perpetrator completely lost the stealth needed to pull this off. Forensic traces prove this violent clash dragged out considerably. It sparked a desperate struggle right beside a main entrance that was never meant for their getaway. Savannah Guthrie pleaded publicly, demanding somebody finally step up and speak the truth. She confessed her relatives are enduring absolute hell. When darkness falls, she lies awake picturing the pure horror her mother endured, describing the mental toll as completely unbearable. Her relatives put up a staggering $1 million bounty to bring Nancy back. Federal agents also attached an extra $100,000 to locate her or lock up the monsters responsible. Anyone holding clues about that terrifying night in the Catalina foothills above Tucson, spanning January 31st to February 1st, 2026, must dial 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. Did this breakdown completely flip your perspective on Nancy's vanishing past this video around and drop your smartest theories down below? We need sharp, calculated logic right now, not just random internet rumors. The story reveals more than just a chilling crime. It reflects how fragile safety can be even in spaces we trust the most. Behind the forensic details and mysterious twists lies a powerful lesson about awareness, responsibility, and the value of human life. What stands out is not only the violence, but the sudden change, the moment when a plan went wrong. It reminds us that actions, especially harmful ones, often spiral beyond control. One poor decision can create consequences far greater than anyone anticipates, affecting not just one person, but families, communities, and society as a whole. At the same time, the careful work of investigators highlights the importance of truth and persistence. Even when answers are hidden, dedication and attention to detail can slowly bring clarity. Justice may not be immediate, but it is pursued through patience and integrity. This story urges us to be more mindful of our surroundings, of others, and of our own choices. It teaches that prevention, awareness, and compassion are far more powerful than fear. In a world where uncertainty exists, choosing empathy and responsibility is what ultimately keeps us and others safe.